Hi, my name is Rachel. I was on the startup side a couple of times in Silicon Valley and worked for large corporations. And I now mentor startups in Tel Aviv, in Israel, of all places, and connect them with investors and mentor them. So I was asked to talk a little bit about what is an investor perspective on startup funding. I'm going to approach it from a Tel Avivian point of view and give you some insight on Israel and what's going on in the startup scene in Israel. So, first of all, the fundamentals are never going to change. When an investor looks at an idea, he will always look for the same things. They develop a certain concept and a certain formula. They know how their startups have succeeded in the past, and they're going to look for a similar team or maybe a team with certain strength. And so that will never change. The market might change, the industry might change, but not the fundamentals. So what are the fundamentals? What investors look for in the near future as far as the fundamentals are? Basically, they look at market trends. They really want to know that they're investing in a hot market. They're learning the markets. They're always on top of things. They want to make sure that this market is really showing high performance and growth before they invest. So it doesn't mean that if you're coming and you have a great idea in a market that is not growing, that you won't get an investment. But they usually tend to invest in ideas that are in a hot market. You can also be inventing a market, which has happened, and we'll talk about disruptive innovation. But usually this is what they look for. They actually look at growth patterns, and they look at the finance of the particular market. If it has shown good performance and growth, they'll be keen to listen to your idea. Most importantly is the team. They really want to connect with your team. They want to make sure that you're the kind of people that they can work with long term, that you're willing to listen, that you're flexible, that you might change your idea along the way because maybe you think it's the greatest idea on earth, and your first 5 customers will say, your idea is great, but if you only changed it a bit here and there, I might be your first customer, then you've got to be willing to listen and not really fall in love with your first idea. Fall in love with your 8th idea, but not with your first idea. Fall in love once you have a couple of customers and you're really succeeding. So they really want to look at a team that is receptive to new ideas, that is willing to be mentored. If you have an investor that is willing to mentor you, that's awesome. But he may look for a team that is willing to listen. One of the investors also mentioned the team as far as finance. So you may have a great programmer, but you can't be a CEO. So one of the teams approached me, and he was a really great developer, but he really couldn't present in front of a crowd. He couldn't talk to investors. He couldn't present a marketing or a pitch. And I told him, you really shouldn't present in front of investors because you're not going to get the investment this way. So, put your ego aside. Choose someone from your team that can present to an investor. Invest in a nice, professional investment deck. You're going to an investor and you're asking for $1 million. Pay a few dollars for a nice investment pitch. Don't come with something that looks unprofessional. So your management team should include a good team that includes, R&D and a good business sense, someone from marketing, or someone with business development and sales experience. The other thing they look at, if you already have a product that's ready, is they look at the product. Is it functioning? Does it really do what it's supposed to do? Is it scalable? Is it really applicable for global markets? Did you do your research? Yeah, well, it could be great for Poland. Is it really good in other European countries? Have you looked at your competition? Have you researched it? What about the US market? Who are your competitors? Have you looked into that? You're going to get a lot of tough questions, and you need to come up with the answers. You need to be ready to answer, and always think globally. Traction. So you're asking for investment. They'll want to know, well, when am I going to get return on investment? Are you ready to sell? If you're not ready to sell, when are you going to be ready to sell? You need to have the answers. It's always good to, even when you don't have paying customers, to show that you have some traction, that there are some, bring a letter of intent from a potential customer, from someone who's, helping you with a proof of concept, of saying, this could be a really great idea for our corporation, even if they're not your customers already. And of course, the business plan. Make sure that you know your finance, you know exactly what you're talking about. You know what your profits are going to be. It may not be actually the case. It may not be, but you know your margins. You know what's going to be your return on investment. You know what you're going to charge for the product. They may actually change it and tell you, that's not applicable, but still, be ready with answers. Show that you understand your product, show that you understand your market, show that you understand, what your competitors are charging, etc. Give some examples. Give some examples of what your competitors are charging, how much money they've made. Give some examples of what about other startups in that particular area. How did they succeed? How are they doing now? Give some examples. Okay, so beyond that, we have market forces. So we mentioned that what's going on in the market is really important. You can come up with a great product, but the market force will affect the value of your company. If the interest rates are high, if the market is having a downfall, it will affect the demand for your product. And so learn about the market forces. No investor wants to invest in a startup that is that's in a market that is shown poor performance. Market regulations. So I'm going to mention shortly some markets that are considered hot today. And a lot of companies in Tel Aviv and Silicon Valley and Boston are working to develop products in those markets. But sometimes there are market regulations that drive initiatives and create a need for new technologies. For example, it's becoming really hard to get an FDA approval. So all of a sudden, a lot of medical devices and mobile health applications are becoming very popular because it's easier. There are also global forces. If there's like a US, China Global Energy Summit or European Summit, and they decided to reduce pollution, that's going to create a need for new products. So the customer will say, I actually don't want to pay for this energy saving application, but I have to. I'm forced to reduce emissions. I'm forced to reduce energy in my factory. And that will create a need for new products. So what are the hottest markets right now in startup investment? In Silicon Valley, in Tel Aviv, around the world. Wearable devices, both consumer and enterprise. So we've heard a lot about wearable devices for people that want to monitor their health, their sport, but now it's going to be to monitor also your efficiency and your performance at work. IoT and smart home, basically the Internet of Things. Everything is connected today. People were not eager to expose any information about what's going on in their home, but now they're very accepting. They want all their electrical devices at home to be connected, and they want to monitor their electricity. They don't mind uploading everything to the cloud. They're very accepting that, everything in their home is actually reporting to the cloud, to the energy company, and allows them to actually monitor their energy usage. And people are also very open to the idea of having smart home, not just monitoring, controlling everything. With one click, your washing machine, on your washing machine you can order detergent, everything is connected. Your refrigerator is going to know when your milk runs out. People are open to those ideas. And that's going to create Also the need for big data management. It's an enormous amount of data that needs to be managed. So it's basically both for the enterprise and the home. And that's going to also create the need for machine learning, sophisticated algorithms, and cybersecurity, confidential information that's on the cloud regarding people. It could be also for corporations, it could be for governments, it could be for the private consumer. All of that needs to be secured. FinTech. So in FinTech, we see emerging markets, we see new markets, peer-to-peer money transfer, transferring money across borders. These are concepts that did not exist before online, and they're becoming very popular, going to continue to grow. Digital health and medical devices, as I've mentioned, it's becoming really difficult to approve new medicine and new ways of treatment. So the mobile tech and combination of sophisticated software and hardware are growing. I actually see a lot of interest in China. They're coming to Israel and looking for devices, medical devices. Cloud and SaaS. Okay, so software as a service and cloud capabilities, as well as robotics and 3D printing. Some of the robotics industry is growing due to counterterrorism efforts. New evacuation technologies as well in case of a terror attack, which is something that most countries did not worry about in the past as much. Now it's becoming an issue. So this disruptive innovation is really not a particular market. Disruptive innovation, and I work and I mentor startups about it, it's really creating new business models, creating new markets, creating a new service that didn't exist before at all, looking at certain industries that have worked a certain way in the past and completely turning it around. The whole business model is changed. So we see an example with Airbnb. Who would have thought that people would let strangers into their home? People thought this would never work, but it's becoming extremely successful. People offer their home, people offer their cars, and are willing to take a risk and believe in people and have an income on the side. Other industries like Fiverr. Fiverr is very successful around the world. It's an Israeli startup, and their first offer was something that people thought that would absolutely never work. And that was offering a service for $5. This is why it's called Fiverr. And offering great service for $5? What consultant would agree to do that? Fiverr's become extremely successful. So consultants around the world have offered their services for $5. And then once they've gained some the customers gained some confidence, they offered their services for $25, and then they offered services for $50 and for $100, and Fiverr is extremely successful. And this is a business concept that no one thought would work. So you really have to think about new business models that are simpler, cheaper, provide a service that never existed before, access a market that never existed before, like people's homes. So I asked some of the top investors in Israel about their opinion about regarding Poland and what Poland should do in order to advance themselves. Carmel Ventures, I spoke to the principal, I work with him closely, and I've asked him, you're one of the leading venture capital funds. Oh, yes. And they invested invested $2 billion in industry, in startups in Israel, and they've had a tremendous success. Some of the top 50, out of the top 50 most successful Israeli startups in Tel Aviv, I think the first 10 received investment from Carmel Ventures. So I asked them about Israel and, what can Israel teach Poland? Remember, Israel started with nothing. Most of the Israelis are actually immigrants. When we came to Israel, there was nothing but desert. And so the Israelis thought of what can they do? There was not much water. So the first thing was to think about technologies to provide water. And so they've developed the drip technology to provide an efficient way to water the fields. Then they moved on and they provided technologies to, since we don't have a lot of land, to allow to milk cows in a more efficient way. The cows in Israel produce more milk than any other cow in the world. And so for every, we really had, and then the other issue was the cybersecurity. A lot of the cybersecurity technology came from the Israeli army. You have a lot of soldiers that were in special units and had to develop cybersecurity technology for the Israeli government to protect Israel from cyber attack. And so the cyber technology industry began to boom in Israel. So what does it mean for Poland? Poland is in a strategic location, unlike Tel Aviv, that has no access to the nearby economies. We have no access to their economy. We are surrounded by people who don't want to do business with us. Poland is in a strategic location and size, and it can become a gateway, a hub of innovation to the rest of Europe. As we've mentioned here before, you have great IT and human resource capabilities. You've got a lot of developers. You can really consider becoming an expert in certain areas, building up that area, bringing experts, bringing in investment, and believing in the capability of the startup ecosystem here. I also asked Baruch Gindin. Baruch Gindin is the head of the high-tech investment committee of 100 Angels. It's one of the most successful angel club really in the world. He was the Gartner Middle East CEO. And I asked him I told him that I'm going to visit Poland and what can we learn from the Tel Aviv ecosystem. So his answer was that Israel developed the startup ecosystem by a joint effort. It wasn't just the startups trying to make it. It was really a joint effort by the government, Israeli army, academic institutions, corporations, VC funds, local angels and investors who all came together to create a startup scene. There are government-supported policies, regulations, funds available to entrepreneurs who want to start a company. The Israel chief scientist funds a lot of startups in Israel. So as you can see, these are the building blocks. It never really, it will never really pull off if you don't have this, I call it the circle of life for the startup ecosystem, where you have universities that are now allowed to sell their research in Israel and commercialize their research, which is pretty amazing. You have skilled and educated workforce. The workforce in Israel, they're saying that the universities of Israel, they're not the best in the world, but they're best at actually providing entrepreneurs. The whole cultural shift, it is a cultural shift because when you're an entrepreneur, you're a risk taker, you understand the markets, but you always think about how to challenge it. It's a new way of thinking that it was developed in the universities by professors. They wrote a lot of books about it, and so they really changed the culture in order to create this entrepreneurship and ecosystem of startups in Israel. Okay, so other than my perspective from as a Tel Avivian and as someone who has worked in Silicon Valley and in Boston, I do meet a lot of Chinese investors. They come to Israel. They want to invest in companies in Europe and Israel. And they realize that they don't have innovation, not enough innovation, and they need to catch up with the rest of the world. And so they come to Israel to learn. So one of the suggestions that was made is go to really booming ecosystems, startup ecosystems, and learn. Join some of the investment funds there, join the ecosystems, collaborate, and learn. So the Chinese leaders that are coming to Israel, they're coming to learn. They're also coming to buy and acquire and invest. But they're mainly coming to learn and take that knowledge back into their ecosystems and their provinces. Israel has worked very hard to bring global and R&D, to build global R&D facilities. They've signed a lot of agreements with global companies around the world. They've co-invested in them in order to convince them to come to Israel, because no one wanted to come to Israel. For example, I think they invested billions of dollars in Intel facilities just to bring Intel to Israel. So beyond, the help from the government and help from investors and help from VCs, there needs to be an entrepreneurship culture. The culture means that you reward risk-taking, you have an attitude of a must-win, you develop products that are ready to go global. Don't just think about what's good for Poland. Do the research and find out what's good globally. Come up with innovative solutions and prove it. And once you prove it, you're going to have more money pouring in, more investors that are willing to take the risk. And as always, determination, persistence, endurance, commitment. It's a lot of work to create a startup. There's a lot of disappointments. You're going to get a lot of no's from investors. You're going to get a lot of no's from customers. And you have to be ready. You have to take it in and pull yourself together and pick up the pieces and believe in yourself. Okay, so my advice to my entrepreneurs, the conclusion, is be prepared to answer tough questions, show that you're passionate and confident, that you've learned the material, and when you meet an investor, interview the investor. You got to really like the investor. You're going to work with him long term. He may invest in you again. You want to get along with your investor. You want to like him. You want to actually appreciate and respect his opinion. So as much as he's interviewing you, you have to interview him and make sure that it's the right match. And my advice to Poland, is, if I have the honor to say, is create an ecosystem that focuses on innovation, that fosters innovations. Learn from success stories. It doesn't happen in one day. Silicon Valley took 60 years. Tel Aviv took also many years. It doesn't happen in one day, but you're doing great. That's it. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Rachel. You want to take a question? All right. So I really liked your comment about interviewing the investor. What should we ask them? What are your recommendations for questions to ask the investor?
Well, sometimes you want it really depends on the personality of the startup. Some startups want to be very independent. They don't want an investor who is going to interfere with every possible problem that they encounter. They want someone who's more laid back, who's going to trust them, who's going to value their experience and knowledge. And while other entrepreneurs have not much knowledge, they're inexperienced, they might want a mentor who will guide them. They might want someone who can open doors for them. So it's not enough that you're just investing in me. What context do you have? Do you know any key customers that you can bring to the table? Can you provide some expertise, some mentors, and really, what do you expect from me? I mean, do you expect return on investment within how long? Maybe I can't provide what you're expecting me. Maybe you're too aggressive and that's not right for me. And so you really have to find out if the personalities match and if the financial expectations match, and find the right the investor that's right for you. Otherwise, it could turn into a nightmare.
Absolutely. Any questions from the audience? There's one right here. And all right, go ahead.
Hi, Rachel. Can you hear me? Yep. My name is Anna. Thank you very much for your excellent presentation. Actually, you've mentioned the role of academia in Israel. And how about the TTOs? Are they a good fishing place for great ideas and a place for communicating them to the investors? Technology transfer offices.
You mean in the academia world, in the universities?
Yeah, because I believe, like in Poland, your university have technology transfer offices that talk to the scientists looking for the best ideas. And do they then communicate them to the investors?
Yeah, so in Israel, many of the universities have accelerators. They're very involved in the market. They advise to startups. A lot of professors sit on board of directors, and advise startups. If they're related to health, for example, you will see a lot of professors and hospitals helping startups. It's very common to see startups that are in the medical field walk around a hospital and get access to the hospital facility or data. Yes, the universities are very involved with the startup scene and with the startup ecosystem. They provide incubation and research facilities, and that's very important. Yeah.
Rachel, a last question before you leave us. You work a lot with investors. I'm sure there's a lot of founders sitting out here, waiting to do their first, reach out to an investor. What would be your best advice when you reach out? What is the cheat sheet? How do you approach an investor?
Well, the important question is, how do you approach an investor? And always try to find someone who knows the investor. Don't just send an email. It may work, but many times if you find someone who would recommend you, or find someone that knows the investor, it's a better way to approach the investor. And take some time to learn about the investor before you approach the investor. See what they've done in the past. See what companies they've supported in the past. Learn a bit about them, about their history and their record before you approach them. And you might find some things in common.
And ask for the
that
advice.
You can talk about. Yeah. It's very important that not to show that you know everything when you don't. Be very frank. Be very honest if you don't know. And it's very important to also listen, because the investors will test you. They'll sometimes challenge you, ask you questions just to see if you're fighting it, if you're stubborn, if you're not listening. They kind of challenge you, so be very careful when you do that. Sometimes they're kind of playing tricks just to see, how you're gonna be able to handle pressure, for example. So beware of that when you're talking to an investor.
All right, Rachel, thank you so much for all your insights. Let's give a big round of applause for Rachel Milgram. Thank you.